Right now there's no active, scheduled negotiations ongoing with Ukraine.
Rubio saying Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov warned all the embassies that Kyiv would remain a dangerous place as the conflict continues. The Secretary of State saying Russian President Vladimir Putin had asked Lavrov to call him to relay this message directly to President Trump.
It's Ken Harbaugh with the MeidasTouch Network. I'm about to head home from Ukraine. It's been another extraordinary trip. As I was arriving last week, Russia's foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, warned Marco Rubio that Americans needed to evacuate Kyiv. More bluster, and the Ukrainian people know it, even if the U.S. government does not. That's not to say Russia's bombardments aren't horrific. Last week saw the largest attack of the war, over 2,000 drones and missiles, including ballistic missiles, launched against civilian targets across the country. And the silence from the mainstream media has been deafening. But the Ukrainians I talked to, every single one of them, remain unbowed. If anything, they realize that this tactic of the Russians bombarding their cities is a last resort because the Russian military is making no headway at the front. In fact, in places they're losing ground. They're about to lose control of the highway that resupplies their forces in Crimea. For the first time in a very long while, Ukrainians have a real sense that they've got the advantage. And they're no longer fighting with one hand tied behind their backs because of policies the U.S. has imposed. I had the chance to talk about this with Senator Ruben Gallego, who is also visiting Ukraine. We met up in Odessa shortly after another drone and missile attack on this city. In fact, just as we were wrapping up the interview, the air raid alarm went off and the senator was rushed to the basement bunker. But we covered all the main points. Here's our conversation. Senator, thank you so much for making time. We are in Odessa on the shore of the Black Sea, a city of historical significance, especially strategically, and one that Putin has wanted from not just the beginning of the war, but his entire reign.
Well, the Russians have wanted it.
The Russians have wanted it for centuries.
Centuries, exactly,
As you talk to Odessites, I learned that's what we call them. What are you hearing from them about their resolve, about Ukraine's resolve to stay free?
Well, it's not just talking to them, it's actually seeing it.
Yeah.
And, yesterday I arrived and walked around the old city. And what you're seeing is people that want to live. They want to, be free and independent. And you're seeing people that actually are not going to let a war hold them back. It tells me that, they're winning the day when they're able to just enjoy life. And, a place like Odessa or Kyiv, which I've been to a couple of times, are really showing the Russians what liberty, what freedom looks like. For me, it's sad that I think a lot of Americans just don't understand what is actually being fought here. We as a country can take a lot of pride, especially if we can help not just the Ukrainians survive, but defeat Russia.
We were with a mobile air defense team last night. The last time I went out with these guys was just a few months ago. And in that short time span,
learned a lot, huh?
The innovation that they have gone through. I mean, that cycle would take probably a decade or more in the U.S.
Which is very scary.
It is, especially given that we're in a shooting war right now. What lessons do we need to be learning right now from the Ukrainians if we're not to keep getting our
everything
handed to us?
Yeah, well, everything. Not just kind of on the kind of mill-to-mill side, but on the civil resistance side, the civilian mindset that's taking place here, that have kind of a national unity with a national goal. How to reorient their economy, as well as even kind of the military. Don't know how another would say that's not political, but the military-industrial complex, right? Our military-industrial complex is very heavy loaded to some very top contractors, which are really good in certain types of war and especially certain types of investments, without a doubt, especially for high-end procurement platforms such as F-35, satellites, and all that. But are they made for the $1,000 drone? Are they right aligned for that? Maybe they are, maybe they aren't. But we certainly as a nation aren't right now, right? So I think we have to really look at, who our contractors are, who are actually, what type of weaponry, munitions need to be built and created, And do we have the capability to do that should the balloon go up? Right now, we don't. Right? We just saw this from Iran. We were spending millions of dollars to take down $20,000 drones, right? If we find ourselves in that situation again against a near-peer competitor, a real near-peer competitor such as like China, we're going to find ourselves in a very, very difficult situation to a point where we may not end up having the competitive advantage that we want. So this is the time, right? We've invested a lot of money and time in Ukraine. The Ukrainians have invested a lot of their personal, blood, sweat, and tears, the livelihood of their whole nation, and they're gladly willing to share this information with us. It's time for us to not have the hubris, and actually take that information and learn from it.
You brought up the civil defense mindset.
Yeah, civil resistance mindset.
Civil resistance mindset. There is a resistance in the occupied territories that is rarely written about, but is alive.
Might be better, but yes.
Best.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that is shifting given the Ukrainians' realization that there's a narrative in the West, in America in particular, that suggests those territories should be given up as part of a deal. What can Dems do? What leverage do you have if something like that gains momentum to knock it down, to remind people in the States that Ukrainians are fighting for all of Ukraine?
Well, I think the most important thing is, let's understand history. The Russians never understand a peace deal, right? Yeah. And then whether they're Russia, whether they're Tsarist, whether they're Soviet Union, peace deals are the beginning of negotiating deals for them, right? Even though we may not recognize it as that. I mean, if you look at any thing that they've done historically, they've largely have ripped up peace deals as soon as it was convenient to them. Yeah. And so all we're doing is basically giving them time to rearm, and then they'll be back. So that's one, right? And those Americans, including elected officials that are lying to themselves, thinking there's a peace deal to be had that Russia's going to abide by, they're either fools, dumb, or they're complicit in one way or the other. Number two, in no world, at any point, would a country, even the United States, give up what they have won on the battlefield at the negotiating table? Right. What you earn through the blood of the men and women, you negotiate at the negotiating table. You would absolutely lose both the trust as well as the confidence of your countrymen and your veterans. And there's no way that a country like Ukraine, who has fought for so long and have killed generations of men and women in defense of their country, their sovereignty, and their culture, would allow, whether Zelensky wanted it or not, for them to give up that. You're essentially setting up Ukraine for failure by negotiating away what they have gained and have protected, right? So, right there, as a policymaker, where you want to see your investment come back in terms of a sovereign and successful Ukraine, that'd be the dumbest thing in the world. Yeah. So, and
a democratic Ukraine, the people
democratic
have
Ukraine.
A vote here. It's
absolutely.
Not
it's not. Yes, right. It's not which I was commenting to a policymaker yesterday. Even if there was a deal to be had that, let's say, gave up portions of the Donbass, with a country with as many veterans that are here, what do you think the result of that would be, right? People voting you out, or people just saying no, it's not going to happen. So, as a policymaker and an elected official, whatever we can do, either on the fund side of it, as well as publicly pushing against that, as well as anything that has to do with the voting side. That's probably where we have our the most amount of leverage I have.
Last question. Ukraine for so long has been fighting with one hand tied behind its back because of us, because of the United States. That is beginning to change, and you see the results in these deep
because
strikes.
They actually have their own capability to actually deep strikes.
Their own capability. At what point do Senate Dems give up on trying to persuade the administration to do the right thing and just empower the Ukrainians in other ways?
Well, look, if we have the capability to actually empower the Ukrainians in other ways, through constitutional and legal methods, we'd do it right now. Unfortunately, the president is still the head of the military, has the capability to deploy or not deploy some of our capabilities, even as much as we can push legislative through that. I think the question that we have to have is like the next administration needs to be willing to understand what the cause is right now, what we can and help the Ukrainians do, and what effect that would actually have both here, but also for the rest of the world. And to be honest, like I was mostly proud of what Biden did when it came to Ukraine, but they held back. They held back way too long, and they were slow. I came and led a delegation, a bipartisan delegation, in December of 2020, right before the war kicked off. I think it was 2020. Yeah, and the fact that we still had not, released the javelins to the extent that they needed, that we weren't really sharing information with the Ukrainians, all this kind of stuff. Really, I think, prolonged the war and made the initial Russian invasion successful, at least for the Russians. The fact that we didn't give, Ukraine like the long strike capability for quite a while, or we held back munitions, we held back tanks. It was always one step behind where we needed to be. Only prolonged the war, killed more Ukrainians, and only made the Russians stronger.
Do you have any message you want to deliver to Ukrainians who are watching this?
Slava Ukraini.
Hadom Slava. Thanks.
Not my first time running to a bunker.
So we just got an air raid alert in the middle of our interview with the senator, which means we got to go down into the bunker. They have their own protocols. We have our own, but they don't, I guess, mess around with a senator's physical safety. So we're going into the bunker. Pretty nice bunker.
Want to stay plugged in? Become a subscriber to our Substack at MeidasPlus.com. You'll get daily recaps from Ron Filipkowski, ad-free episodes of our podcast, and more exclusive content only available at MeidasPlus.com.